Television series, shows, and movies like The Gilded Age, Downton Abbey, and The Great Gatsby have highlighted a golden age and lifestyle and history of the aristocracies and uber-wealthy that is still fascinating today. Many of these mansions and estates in the USA are now open to the public in one way or another. But one story is truly unusual. It sounds something like a dramatic streaming series. A hotel kitchen worker eventually buys a hotel 5 years later. By catering to the rich, who were the basis of the Gilded Age, he essentially creates the Waldorf Astoria. Now rich himself, he proceeds to build a mansion for his family. Then tragedy strikes. His wife dies. Grief-stricken and heartbroken, he abandons construction and the house falls into ruins. What would have happened if he finished the project? What would it look like? How would it be furnished? I'm the NYC Traveler, and we're in the Thousand Islands, New York. Welcome to the Thousand Islands region, a popular tourist destination shared by the United States and Canada. Though named the Thousand Islands, there are actually 1,864 islands. To qualify as an island, no matter the size, the piece of land has to be above water all 365 days of the year and hold at least 1 to 2 trees, depending on which resource you read. Hart Island qualifies, and then some. The story of the castle is as fascinating as the building itself. Located in the St. Lawrence River, George Boldt decided that this was the perfect place to build his dream house, a castle actually. He began building it in 1900 after he bought the island in 1895. But in 1904, Louise, his wife, dies suddenly. Construction stops. The castle falls into ruins, and it becomes a prime target for vandalism and a victim to the elements. Incredibly, Boldt continued to summer in the Thousand Islands until he died in 1916, 12 years later. Finally, in 1977, 77 years after construction began, 73 years after construction stopped, and 61 years after George Boldt dies, the Thousand Island Bridge Authority buys the island, the castle, and the yacht house for $1 on the condition that all proceeds go to the continuing restoration of the mansion for the enjoyment of the public. In other words, to draw in tourists. As of 2022, $50 million, and over a century later, since construction began in 1900, we have Boldt Castle, as some of the rooms might have looked had construction continued or had been finished. Ironically, the goal was not to actually complete the house, but to bring it back to what it looked like in 1904 when construction stopped. However, that original goal has been surpassed, and now several rooms in the castle have been furnished to what they might have looked like had the castle had been completed in the 1910s. You're invited to come back over the years to see the progress as the castle is continued to be restored, renovated, rebuilt, and furnished. To get to Boldt Castle on Hart Island, you take a ferry, either the free one directly from Alexandria Bay, New York, or via one of the river tours. The castle is located in New York State, in the United States. Ferries from Canada are allowed, but since this is an official USA port of entry, Canadian visitors will need a passport. You can even sail there on your own. Check the Boldt Castle website on how to do this. Also, check the website for the current companies that provide the ferries and the water shuttles to Hart Island. You will need a ticket to enter the grounds right at the dock. You can buy a ticket for either the castle, the yacht house, or both. We recommend getting both tickets. Just plan to spend at least half a day there, at the very least. There is a cafe on the grounds near the dock. As a rule, food and drink are not allowed in the castle. There is an app that you can download for your self-guided tour, which provides interesting bits of information as you move from room to room, floor to floor, and outside of the castle. The castle is being restored and built based on the blueprints and floor plans left behind. You can explore either the grounds or the castle first and follow the app for your tour. We found the app to be very helpful. You will enter the castle at the Grand Hall, but rather than explore that immediately, the app will have you move to the reception room, where they said the family would have greeted visitors. The billiard room is an informal room where gentlemen would have gathered after dinner. The dining room faces west to see the sunset. Mrs. Boldt would have planned a dinner party well in advance for up to 24 utensils for a meal. This room has actual furniture from the Boldt family, including the table. The touring app says that most visitors would have never seen the behind-the-scenes part of the house, but from here you go to the servant area. The butler's pantry was used to move the meal to the dining room and to store the china, silverware, and glassware. The maid's dining room would have been used for the maids who served the Boldts personally. These servants would have also had comfortable living quarters in the house. When construction stopped on the castle, this was used as a storeroom for the materials. Some of the items have now been used in the house itself, and some of it is still in storage, waiting to be used. Those materials had to be moved so that the kitchen could be brought to life. The servants' dining room, different than the maid's dining room, is where most of the staff would eat. A servant's wing would have dining, sleeping, and living quarters, as well as work areas for sewing and other chores. There would be a separate staircase and entrance from outside. The app did not have much information on the covered porch, but since it is on the same side as the dining room, one can imagine the family would have enjoyed one of those famous Thousand Islands sunset from here, as well as a view of one of their gardens. According to research, Mrs. Boldt liked to dance, but Mr. Boldt didn't. Nevertheless, they probably would have hosted parties during their summers here. Mr. Boldt was a pianist though, so the acoustics are designed for live musicians. It is likely that he planned to install a reed organ. Since George liked books, the library and his office might have been one of his favorite rooms. Even the decor on the walls tells stories and has sculptures. We entered the house at the Grand Hall. We went to the reception room, but now we're back at the hall, where you would enter coming through the front door. Like the new money of the Gilded Age, both George and Louise came from the lower middle class backgrounds, and like what we have seen in dramas, they probably would not have been initially accepted in the old money society and circles as equals, especially in the big cities. But in the Thousand Islands, on their own island, the Boldts would have been the top of society, so the Grand Hall represents that. You would see their money represented in the stained glass dome at the top, the marble staircase, the molded plaster ceiling, and of course, in the furnishings and the decor, paintings, sculptures, etc. throughout the house. Louise was a teen bride. She wedded George, who was 11 years her senior. They worked as a team in the early years, building George's hotel career. Deeply in love, it is speculated that she died of heart failure at the young age of 42, leaving 2 adult children, George Jr., aged 24, and Louise Clover, the daughter, aged 21. Her husband followed her 12 years later, and they are both buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in New York City. The stained glass dome features the family crest, a letter B with a heart. Apparently, hearts are a theme throughout the Grand Hall and the house. The elevator had actually been installed. The workers probably used the original Otis invention so they could move the materials during construction. They used water pressure to operate it. Now, of course, it has been updated and modernized. We are now on the 2nd floor. Most wealthy families in this era had separate rooms for the husbands and the wives. Even if they slept together, they would have had their clothing and other personal objects in their own area. The speculation is that Louise's rooms are larger because ladies of the day needed more space to get ready, and she would spend more time in here than George would have spent in his room. George would have spent a lot of time in his private office on business. According to the blueprints, each bedroom in the house was to have a private bath. So this is a sample of what one of the bathrooms would have looked like. The daughter's name was Louise Clover, but everyone called her by her middle name Clover. She was an avid speedboat racer. Since Clover was 21 when construction was halted, her suite of rooms reflects that of a young lady with her own reception room. We have been emphasizing that construction was halted by George upon the death of Louise. So the 3rd floor shows what the rest of the castle might have looked like when the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority took it over back in the late 1970s. Vandalism is apparent, and there are signs everywhere that adding to the graffiti is against the law. But this area gives you an idea of how bad the building had disintegrated. Animals, squatters, mold, moss, and the weather all took its toll over nearly 3/4 of a century. The 3rd floor will be the toughest to restore because the plans for it have not been found. Also, the touring app notes that the 2nd floor plans had rooms for the daughter but not the son. So it is assumed his suite or even an apartment would have been up here. While you're on the 3rd floor, take advantage of the impressive views of the St. Lawrence River and the surrounding area. The 3rd floor can be considered one of the most interesting areas because you can see the work that has not started, the work that has begun, and the progress of some of the floors and walls that are already completed. You can see evidence of the restoration in progress. On the 4th floor, you can see the stained glass dome up close. The plans were never recovered, but this was what the restorers imagined. The fourth floor would have probably been more servants' quarters for those who did not fit downstairs. Also, there seems to have been a private sitting room and observation deck that would take advantage of the views of the Thousand Islands region and the St. Lawrence River. From the top to the bottom, go down to the basement at some point, which has more evidence of the restoration in progress, including the pool. Not everyone will be interested in seeing old walls and unfinished floors, but for some, it's fascinating to see how a mansion gets constructed, and it's a great opportunity to show children how buildings come to be. You can also imagine, as the family lived here for generations perhaps, upgrades would have had to be made to the plumbing, electricity, heating, air conditioning, and adding modern conveniences for telephones and eventually technology such as the internet. After touring the house, you are probably ready to get outside and see the grounds, the gardens, and the other buildings. Hart Island was originally called Hart, H-A-R-T, after the original owner, Elizur Hart. Also, in Old British English, a male deer, the stag, was called a hart, H-A-R-T. George Boldt changed the spelling to represent the love he had for Louise, so you can find harts and hearts, stags, all over the island for the two traditions. The castle, a mansion really, is built on bedrock, shipped from the Boldt quarry on Oak Island in the area. There are supposed to be 122 rooms. Judging from the exterior, it looks like it. The outside of the castle is interesting actually, but especially Ulster Tower, the playhouse. To us, it resembled Park Güell in Barcelona, ancient, futuristic, as if it were literally from another galaxy and era far, far away. This structure was completed during George's time. Most people assumed it was a playhouse for actual children, and perhaps the Boldts did have future grandchildren in mind since their own children were grown by this time. But it was designed as a fun place for adults to hang out in. The restoration of the tower comes from the news articles and old photos. The tower included a bowling alley, billiards room, kitchen, library, and bedrooms upstairs, sort of like a close home away from home. Of course, no self-respecting mansion of the Gilded Age era would be without its fountains. The powerhouse is another impressive structure on the grounds. Literally built to provide electricity for the island and the buildings, this was the latest technology back then. Using water, there were generators and engines installed to power up the castle. Up top was the clock and chimes tower, which was connected to a keyboard in the original cottage, if you can imagine that. They were destroyed by fireworks in 1939. After the powerhouse, you can head to the Italian Gardens, which emphasizes love and affinity and more hearts. Exterior of the castle, the powerhouse, the gardens, and the rest of the grounds are very lovely, and it is very tempting to stroll and stay there and take in the views from all around the island. By the way, Hart Island is not only its name, but its shape. George Boldt, actually had the shape of the island changed to a heart. But if you bought a dual ticket, it will be time soon to head to catch one of the shuttles over to Wellesley Island so that you can see the Yacht House. The shuttles to Wellesley Island run regularly. What you want to pay attention is what time it's coming back, so that you make sure that you catch the last one back before you have to catch the shuttle back to the mainland. So you'll be taking two boats, one from Wellesley Island back to Hart Island, and one from Hart Island back to whichever mainland you came from. You could only get to Hart Island by boat or ferry, but that's not true for Wellesley Island. Wellesley Island actually is accessible by car. Wellesley Island connects to Wellesley Park, and it also connects to Hill Island, which is in Canada. So make sure that you stay on the correct side of the island and the correct country that you're supposed to be in. If you have your passport, you're good. If not, stay on your side of the block. The Yacht House is actually a museum for boats and yachts. Inside you will find many different boats, many different yachts, little rowboats, and interesting information. If you're not a boat person, you might find out that you like it a little bit better than you thought you would. And if you are a boat person, then this is going to be heaven for you.
The original steel, the beadboard, most of that is original. You'll see where they patched it up. The screw jacks is how they put the boats in and out back then. And so the platform in the fall, they'll lower it and put the shuttle on it for the winter. The only boat here that runs is the big one. That's up in the air right now because it hasn't been in since COVID started. Okay, and then upstairs is the captain caretaker's residence. Mr. Bolt's reception room is up there. There's letters that he wrote to his caretaker in some of the rooms. Thank you.
Upstairs, you will find the caretaker's residence. There's a letter from George Boldt himself. Pay attention to the time. It will soon be time to catch the shuttle back to Hart Island. Between Hart and Wellesley Islands is very quick, but you will appreciate the views from both sides. Make sure you take a look at the Yacht House from one perspective and Boldt Castle from the other perspective. And if you finish touring the castle, it'll be time to catch the ferry back to the mainland. I'm the NYC Traveler, and we've been at Boldt Castle in Alexandria Bay, New York, in the Thousand Islands region.